G'day, I'm Blake Randall from Lunatic, and I'm here to talk to you about Scavenger VR, more specifically our early access build 0.99. Now, we're quite excited about this build because this is going to be the first releasable build for the general public to start with our beta testing process. Without any further ado, let's hop into it, shall we? So one of the first things we discovered when we started working in VR is that many of the things that we promised in the original game design document, with a particular focus on the menu and interface systems, weren't really appropriate for VR. For instance, we were going to have menu selection from just a regular menu, and that didn't really make much sense. So we've gone through and we've done a much more interactive VR system where you can select missions via a map. And also do other things like upgrade the player equipment using in-game interfaces. All of the UI is also in-game, just to make things much more immersive than they would have been with a more traditional HUD.
Well, that's not good. This cage is rigged to blow. You'll have to find and disarm all of the bombs.
Every time a player warps for a new place in the world, they're given a level. Now, these levels can have vastly different goals. In this one, for instance, the goal is to disarm a series of bombs throughout the ship within a given time. So it's sort of like a scavenger hunt. Other missions are varied and include things like combat missions, repair missions, bounty missions, etc. In the current version of the build we have 6 missions, but obviously we plan to expand that considerably for the final release build. In addition to having randomized missions, we also have randomized level generation. Every time a player enters a level, it will not only be random size, but also random layout. As it currently stands, the game has 3 types of enemies in it for this build. Now, while that may not sound like much, each of them represents an archetype of AI. Firstly, we have the alien spores, which are melee enemies that move towards the player and explode on contact. We have pirate-operated salvaging rigs, which are a range enemy that move throughout the level via waypoints and attack the player once they come into range. And finally, we have automated turrets, which will also attack the player from range but can't move. Focusing on AI archetypes will make it easier to add more enemies later. In addition to traditional enemies, we also have other conflict mechanics, such as spreading fire and hull breaches that the player must repair. While this early access build represents a huge milestone for Scavenger VR, we are admittedly a fair way off a full commercial release. The next few months of development are going to focus mainly on adding additional missions, both in terms of the variation and the amount, adding additional enemies with different behaviours, and of course adding more variation to the levels themselves, both in terms of textures and layouts. Thanks very much for listening.